on our first ever episode of Piping Hot. April, I'm so excited for us today to hop into the conversation of, can we afford to be political in our content? Can we not? What comes up for you when you think about this?
Personally, I think we have no choice. But backstory on that is I've spent about 8 years really doing brand partnerships through I'm a Voter, a nonpartisan coalition that I was on the founding team. Really stemmed from this challenge of apathy in our, cultural engagement and civic engagement. And so for the last 7 years, like I said, I've been working with brands to basically encourage voting, which, as we know, is a political act, even though it's been politicized. It's nonpartisan, meant to really just have everybody be able to use their voice, and to encourage, make voting cool so people do it technically. And so we've worked with some of the biggest brands, in the world, from McDonald's to H&M to Nike to sports teams. And obviously here's an image of Vogue. So to me, it's really, it's kind of a moral imperative at this point. If it is the space that you're in, I think that everything is values based, and all of us, whether it's your personal platform, your business platform, are kind of reaching more of a boiling point, I think, into, how do you join a conversation when you're looking at something that, to me, is less political and more human rights even. What do you think?
You know what? You raise an interesting point. I do think it feels more linear right now for brands that have a history of activism, that it's like, well, we can't afford not to, not at this crucial moment. I was actually thinking about this morning, a conversation that I'd had with a client a few years ago. This was at the height of COVID. She was an executive coach, and we were having our weekly call, and she said, Sara, I saw a speech that Dr. Fauci did, and it was perfection. She was like, every single thing that he did, from executive presence to how he's reassuring, the way, she was like, I want to break this speech down and why any executive should follow this speech. And I said, fantastic. And she said, well, I don't know if I can. And I said, why not? And she said, well, what if I blast this to my entire newsletter list, and then I have leads on there who decide not to work with me because I'm featuring Dr. Fauci as an example? And I said to her, would you want to work with anyone who chose not to hire you specifically because you pointed to Dr. Fauci as an example? And she said no. And so I think that one of the things that leaders, brands, people can ask themselves is that, attractive pull marketing for all people is super strong. And so you can have that gut check moment of, if you're nervous, of, okay, what if I do lose business? And April, you and I talked sort of in our pre-chats about, businesses who are pulling away from DEI because of fear of losing business, but actually the reverse is happening. So, you can take this moment where you can kind of say, do I want business to come from sitting on the fence? Do I want business to come from the fact that I'm out there? And also, if you're in a position of privilege where you have the opportunity to speak up and not lose your brand or not lose your job, I think those are all things that you can consider.
Well, I guess it's definitely so many things are on the decline right now in terms of engagement, but also we see division, we see anger, we see a lot of things being weaponized, and yet majority, I believe, of us have everyone's best interest in heart and mind. And so as a brand, generally you start with your why, right? Like, why are you making this product? Why are you selling this? Why are you showing up in this way? And so I believe the stories we tell need to stay aligned. I think it's when people just don't pick a side ever and kind of stay in this weird middle lane, that customers can really sniff that out now more than ever. I think people are realizing the power of their dollar, where they're spending that money. I love what Costco did. I love the fact that they doubled down. You saw just this amazing, just surge on their behalf. I think that the backlash from Target's shareholders, to that decision that was made that could potentially reverse that decision shows you the power of the consumer. And so I think, looking at brands like Patagonia, who've really stayed true to a sustainable narrative and really built in their best practices. They closed down on, voting day, and they donated money that day. And Ben & Jerry's, you look at, there's so many brands that it's really baked into their DNA to be an advocate and to have a voice. And I think more and more consumers are choosing this over that, because as we know, there's 1,000 things out there you can buy. There's 1,000 places you can buy them from. And so if it's boycotting a brand that is doing things in a way that you don't believe is right, whether it's how they pay their, pay wages, how they, behave politically, where they donate their money to, I do think that, the consumer has a strong voice in this right now. And as a founder of a company and someone who has run companies, you really also want to think about the team and, the people that are associated, not just the customer, and, make sure that you're not alienating. And, it's really hard because we get more and more divided because of sound bites and TikTok posts and misinformation being shared.
Hey.
It's really easy to grab something that sounds really compelling or really terrifying and share it to your audience before you know that it's true. And so I think on our personal brand side, we just all have to do some work. And I think we need to really decide where we can have impact. And so, looking back at brands over the decades, if you remember the Benetton ads, when you were too young, that was my gen, in these like 80s, early 90s, that were just so thought-provoking and so compelling. And I don't see brands doing that as much anymore. Obviously we've had Nike and Colin Kaepernick and people do take strong stands. But I do think it's something that is really important. If you have a platform, if you have a voice, if you have reach in a situation, especially now where it's, it can be overwhelming with how much is changing quickly around us, and how do we not, go insular and, kind of retreat because it feels like it's all too much. And I think this is the biggest and most important time for company owners, for leaders to really think about what's important to them, from a human perspective. And that's why I think politics aside, red, blue, I think they've gotten so divided and blurry to begin with. But where do we really, want to fight, quite frankly, for justice and injustice and for a quality of life for all? And I do think brands, have a voice in that.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's why for this pilot episode, we wanted to dive into this topic, this first, live on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube for the board. You'll actually see different members here every week in these short episodes with expert takes. And that's why we wanted to start with this idea with, can we afford to be political in our content? Can we not? Because one of the things that the board does is match brands and founders with vetted fractional experts or dream teams of experts to help them have these conversations, to bring that historical long view, to bring that expert take. Because the thing is that, the one thing I will say is that we're dialing this into a single digit conversation, which is kind of impressive, pretty fast. But understandably, when you have to get buy-in from all of your stakeholders, this might be a jumping off point, but you need to have these extensive conversations and create spaces where brands can ask questions and really delve into rolling out a thoughtful strategy. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about in future weeks to come, we have members locked in for upcoming Thursdays. Save this time wherever you are, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to kind of have the thought starters here. And then you have the opportunity to continue the conversation with members of the board, whether that's in office hours, or whether that's working with them in a really customized way. But we're not shying away from the important topics. I think it's so important that the board is not a do as I say, not as I do. We're doing it too. And so I love the fact that we're starting by talking about it.
What pushes a lot of people out of corporate jobs, which is why they move into this fractional space, is sometimes, the culture within those companies. And I think by nature, it kind of allows you to break free of some of those rigid rules. And what I love about working with fractional talent is that they don't bring any ego in, and they don't bring, an agenda. They really are there to help. And they're able to do that in a way that just is very different than, on the other side of the P&L. And that it is okay to have conversations that are rough and tricky, that might not necessarily be the easiest thing to have in a 1,000-person company. But when you're one-on-one with a founder, or you're working with, the top leadership team, and you're really helping them, deconstruct the roadmap to reconstruct it, or whatever that may be, it's really kind of powerful to have objective opinions coming into those conversations. And at the end of the day, we're all decades in now in our careers, and what we've seen and experienced, and how it's informed the path that we want to take as our own personal brand. And, kind of going back to that entrepreneurial aspect of any kind of founder or leader in that space. And it's the whole you at the end of the day that kind of needs to show up. And to me, having spent years kind of separating those two things until the latter part of my career, where I got into startups and was able to really, bring purpose and values in. And I feel like this is the world we're living in, is where purpose and values really need to be clear. And again, we're all selling to consumers, and we're all talking to consumers, and connecting, and communities becoming more and more and more important, because we're all feeling this lack of connection. And so all of those things combined, and you're working with someone, really who's handpicked, not only because of how great they are, what they do, but how much, culturally you connect, I think it's just a game changer.
I agree with you. And I actually think that's the perfect end note to end on, that it really is about the consumer, the community. It's about bringing in the talent who can help you have those hard conversations. And I guess, April, we can end here. Can we afford to be political in our content? Can we not? Which side do you land on? And then we'll call it.
Let us know.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.